fraud prevention in the banking sector. This is certainly a topic that's near and dear to us in the banking business, but I think most of us work with banks, so I would think it's near and dear to everybody. So here today to discuss this, what I'll call a sensitive topic, are four of my colleagues. Elizabeth Lane, who is Global Head of Service for Citi Law Firm Group. Mike Steinbach, Head of Fraud Prevention for Personal Banking and Wealth Management. Mary Pope, who is Head of Advisory Banking and Treasury Management. And Brad Magnanello, who is Head of Cybersecurity Risk and Control. So I think this proves to be a very scintillating topic and one that's of interest to everybody. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Liz.
Thank you so much, Jay. And thank you. We have a distinguished panel of my colleagues here joining us about this very important topic. It's a topic, I always say fraud happens to my clients. That's never a good thing when it does happen. It's a better thing for all of us when we can help you prevent it from happening. Mary's group runs a advisory and banking and treasury management, and recently a survey that they conducted of our law firm clients said 87% of firms that surveyed had a fraud event directly affect them within the last 2 years, of that survey. As head of law firm group private bank service, I see at least a firm a week calling to say fraud has happened. And those are the ones that report it. And there's other ransomware attacks and others that we don't ever hear about. So it is a timely and close topic that you all should know as much as you can about. And even on your personal side, of course, fraud happens to you personally and your families personally. So if nothing else from this panel, you also get to take away some things that will help you protect yourself as well. As Jay mentioned, I have my colleague Mike Steinbach, who is the head of personal banking and wealth management fraud prevention. He's been with Citi a number of years, and previous to that was an executive assistant director of the National Security Branch of the FBI. He was with the FBI for over 20 years and is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. Also joining us is Brad Magnanello, who is the Global Head of Governance, Risk, Control, and Policy for Cybersecurity. He has over 25 years of banking industry with Citi, including security, ops, banking, and technology, and O&T experience, and he sits on the board of Cyber Risk Institute Board of Directors. And then lastly is my colleague Mary Pope, who's the head of advisory in banking and treasury management for the private bank and law firm group. She brings over 15 years of prior experience from JP Morgan Chase and Royal Bank of Scotland. And after our discussion with Mike and Brad, will help us also highlight what Citi offers to help protect and defend you against fraud. So we're going to start with my colleague Brad, who's from Cybersecurity, and learn what sort of cyber activity is Citi seeking targeting our law firms.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for having me, everyone. So look, typically what we see is ransomware attacks. Mike will talk a little bit more to the fraud aspect, but what we do see is ransomware attacks. People trying to compromise your systems, mainly through email. It's the number one way that people get in for ransomware. And once in, they're going to try and lock your data. They're going to try and take your data. And I think when you look at the nature of your business, everything is privileged. Certainly I know when I work with our legal representatives, it's because there's something significant happening. There's something serious and that we want to protect. That makes not only your information, but your client's information is then at risk if ransomware comes in. So typically what we're going to see is ransomware. And I think we'll get into some of the best practices around it, but that's the first and foremost thing that we see the law firms being targeted with. And I'm not sure that's not a surprise. I didn't need to come here to tell you that. If you read any newspaper, you're going to see an article a day on ransomware and the impact that it's having.
Brad, so there was this interesting shift last year. After many years of the healthcare industry being the primary target for ransomware attacks, last year, law firms surpassed the healthcare industry as the primary target of ransomware attacks. Why do you think that shift happened?
Again, it's the threat actors go after high-value targets. Again, with the amount of privilege that you have, whether it's personal identifiable information, intellectual property, restricted healthcare information, mergers and acquisitions. That is all very valuable to a threat actor. Again, because it can cascade. They get your data and they get multiple clients' data. They're not only going to hold you at ransom, they're going to hold each individual client at ransom. The other reason is threat actors have been very successful. Healthcare was in the crosshairs for a long time. The healthcare industry has invested heavily in cybersecurity. So the success against the healthcare companies is coming down. And we always say is we want to make it highly ineffective or cost. We want to increase the cost for our threat actors against Citi. You want to increase cost for threat actors to be successful against your law firm. The healthcare industry has caught on to that. They've had to invest heavily. But now you see the success going to manufacturing, and you see it going to the law firms. IBM has estimated that each ransomware attack costs about $5 million. That's what's being paid out. I think the FBI estimated that since 2016, overall ransomware has cost companies $46 billion. So threat actors are going to go where they can have success. They come after the major banks, but it costs a lot. That's why you don't see, knock on wood, that's why you don't see a lot about that in the news. They'll go after the regional banks. Still, it costs a lot. So they start targeting smaller and smaller companies who haven't invested as heavily in cyber. Law firms are a good example of that. Again, manufacturing is, and as we saw, healthcare was in the crosshairs for a long time, and they still are. And with law firms and healthcare, again, it's that sensitive data. And even municipalities, they don't want that information disclosed. So the threat actors are going to keep coming after those smaller targets with that sensitive data and try and hold you to ransom, which is exactly what they're doing.
What sort of best practices can the business adopt to help protect themselves from malicious cyber activity and from business email attacks specifically?
So the best thing to do with you and your employees is awareness. Train them relentlessly. Make sure they're aware that people are trying to send them emails to get them to click on something they shouldn't, to give up information that they shouldn't. Train them on how to identify those emails. We go through phishing attacks or phishing training constantly, and we make them more and more sophisticated. If you fail one of those tests, we give you feedback right away, and we train you as to what you should have looked for. We give them training ahead of that as well. If you fail twice, you're going to go to a training class. If you fail a third time, you're going to lose your external email. We take it very seriously, but first and foremost, make them aware. A lot of it is pretty straightforward. You're not going to see the emails, we found funds for you in Nigeria that stopped, a decade or more ago. But what you're going to see is somebody playing on your name. So the email address will be wrong. Instead of citi.com, it's city.com. We train our employees to look for that, hover over that email address, identify it. Don't click on it unless you know who that sender is. You can always try and look them up, call them, and try and verify. If you can't, wait for them to come back to you. But awareness and training with your staff is first and foremost. Because you can, from a best practice standpoint, obviously you have to have a robust cyber program. And that means what we call defense in depth. Protect yourself from the endpoint, or from the internet, your network, your endpoints, all the way down to your application layer. You have controls throughout. They don't have to get in just once. But still, to get in, it's going to start on your network. It's going to start on the internet. And most likely that's going to come through an email. So train your staff, make them aware, constantly test them with phishing campaigns, and then start investing in your cyber program. Make sure you're patched up to date. I know that is a daunting task. Tomorrow's Tuesday, so it's Microsoft Tuesday. Hundreds of new vulnerabilities will be released by Microsoft tomorrow. We're going to have to work to patch them before they become exploitable. lots of products are like that. So patch, build your defenses, secure your data locally. That means have the application there. You know, encrypt it in database, encrypt it in files. Remind your employees not to share their credentials. Take the time to make your passwords minimally 11 characters. If you're not above 11 or at 11 or above, it really only takes a little bit of time to get through that. An 8-character password can be broken in a matter of hours. Once you start getting to 11, it starts taking a longer time. You go to 15, it's not going to really happen unless somebody shares their password. That one is key because, again, you want to make it so that the threat actor wastes time trying to get in, finds that to get into your network, it's going to cost them more and more money. At some point, there's a loss of return, so they're going to walk away and they're going to move on to the next soft target. But those are the big things. Again, awareness and training, hammer the phishing training. That is the thing that keeps us up at night. As much as we block, as the millions of emails we block, still some are going to get through. Train your employees, enable them to report that, and then build your cyber capabilities, your cyber defense in depth. Those are the things you really need, and the patching.
Great advice. So hopefully we've all locked down our passwords. We catch every phishing attempt to come in. Unfortunately, though, we still see fraud happen. So, Mike, as the fraud head at one of the U.S. largest banks, what keeps you awake at night?
I always get asked this question, but I actually sleep pretty soundly. I always feel like I'm lying a little bit when I answer this question. And it's a different answer when I was in the FBI. Obviously, the answer was a little bit different, but I think it lends itself to where fraud's at. So let me throw some more crazy statistics at you to hopefully scare you a little bit on what fraudsters are capable of. So there's a lot of estimates out there on what the cost of fraud and cybercrime in general are. Some of the estimates, the more reliable estimates, suggest that by 2025, cybercrime in total, Brad's world, my world in total, is about a $10.5 trillion industry. Now, $10.5 trillion does not mean anything to me, but let me put that into perspective. If you take the global illicit drug trade, it's half that, or less. $10.5 trillion is a significant amount of money. So when you think about who is doing this, these are not street criminals with limited intelligence. These are very, very smart folks. Just last year alone, fraud increased 33% of what was reported. And what's reported is really a fraction of what we know is the total amount. 7 in 10 folks reported being scammed or attempted to be scammed. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is, if you're going to ask me what keeps me up at night, it's really the agility and the evolving nature of fraud. They move so quickly. Between my career in government and my career here at Citi, I spend all my time trying to anticipate, figuring out where the bad guys are going to go. And we get it wrong all the time because it's $10.5 trillion. There are lots and lots of very smart people, unfortunately, on the other side of the law, working through day and night, trying to find vulnerabilities. So when we think about what keeps us up at night, it's really that movement of fraud. I'll tell you that it's amazing how agile and how quickly evolving they are. So we saw the pandemic, and we saw fraud shift into the pandemic, and they attacked government, they attacked small business, they attacked PPP, they really went after government. And when that source of funds dried up, we saw them come right back at banks, and they hit deposit accounts in a way that we've never seen in the industry. It took us all last year to lock up the deposit accounts to get it to the point where we felt safe as an industry. So where did the fraudsters go? They went right back to what's tried and true: card fraud, check fraud. Check fraud out of the mail from Christmas time to the present hasn't doubled. And I say check fraud, I'm not talking about sophisticated scams. I'm talking about somebody going to your mailbox and taking your mail, opening it up, and washing your check and sending it out. It's doubled for Citi across the industry. It's skyrocketed. So what keeps me up at night is the evolving nature of the fraudsters. They continue to look for avenues both within government, within the private sector, and with you as a private corporation or as a citizen to attack you. And they're very, very good. So I would just say, if you walk away from anything today, what Brad and I said, is just recognizing how significant of a threat it is and the dollars that are there, and your firms have lots of money that, as Brad indicated, fraudsters go for the money. More money, more focus of attention.
Yeah, certainly in the 20 years I've been in the banking industry, huge shift of fraud events from attacking the bank side and trying to perpetrate the fraudulent wire through the bank. And we've seen a huge shift over the last 10 years especially to more and more attacks against our clients directly, particularly during this, what they call the business email compromise. So, and we're seeing, law firms fall for it and fall for it quite regularly and reach out to us to help to attempt to recover the funds. With business email compromise being one of the most financially damaging, they're really big paydays. We've seen, I saw one for about $3 million about 2 weeks ago. And it's one of the fastest growing crimes targeting businesses. How do criminals carry out the business email compromise? And what do the businesses do to protect itself?
It's a good question. And a lot of it overlaps with what Brad said, but where fraudsters are going, and Citi, quite frankly, our public affairs folks hate when I use this phrase, but it's true. Fraudsters are targeting the weakest link. The weakest link is the customer, is the business. Banks have invested millions and millions of dollars to harden their shells to make it very difficult for fraudsters to get in. Now they still do. They still get in by the millions and billions. But what the fraudsters have figured out is that the weak link in this chain is the customer, is the business, because they are not focused. They believe that cybersecurity and fraud protection is the bank's business or somebody else's business. So the whole idea behind business email compromise is social engineering. And it's no different whether it's a business where we call it business email compromise or on the consumer side for an individual where we call it just a scam. They target you through a number of ways to identify and get you to believe a narrative that perhaps your CFO or your managing partner or somebody who has signatory authority is contacting you for some reason, and what they're trying to do is get you to believe the narrative, and with that narrative, they're getting you to send money somewhere else. You normally pay bills, vendors, settlements, funds disbursement, whatever it is, there's a routine you follow. They're banking on the fact that they can catch you one day. They only have to catch you 1 in 100. They'll shoot out 100 and get one return. It's like fishing. They just pull in one. But when they pull in that unfortunate victim, they get that person to change the routine. So in other words, if there's a routine by which you pay or send money or transfer money, they targeted that person to change the routine. They'll say something like, this is Mike from accounting. We're changing the process by which we pay this account. We have a new routing number. Can you please send it that way? Now, I hear all the time, you know what? I would never fall for that. Fraudsters are not the old Nigerian scams that Brad talked about. They are using spoofed emails. They are using phone numbers that come back to legitimate, but they're able to replicate, and now with AI, they're able to change the voice of and get you to do something out of the ordinary. And that's all they're trying to do is get you to change their processes. Same thing on the personal consumer side. Getting you to change and follow a script where you believe that you're following protocols. So how do you protect yourself? It's really simple. The first thing, and I can't emphasize enough what Brad said, is education. You cannot educate yourselves and your teams enough. And it's not just one and done, folks. People ask me all the time, hey, give me the top 3 ways that people are scammed. Give me the top 3 fraud ways. I won't do it. Because if I tell you those top 3 ways, or these 3, there's a UPS scam, there's a FedEx scam, there's a Walmart scam. If I tell you those 3 things, that's all you'll be looking for. Everything else, the Target scam, well, no, it's not Walmart, it's not FedEx, you'll fall for it. So education has to be an ongoing process because as the scams evolve, you need to keep educating your team. So have recurring, as Brad said, recurring education, making them aware of the types of scams that are prevalent out in the wild, as well as processes. That's number 1, education. Number 2, you've got defined SOPs or processes, business processes by which you pay things, right? Everybody has SOPs or business processes. Make sure those processes are in stone and are not altered. Do not allow your accounting, your teammates to change the business process. Don't take shortcuts. Follow steps 1, 2, 3 every single time. You can't allow yourself or your teams, and that's the other problem. People think, oh, that's somebody else's business. Get involved. Make sure they follow the process. And then the third thing is, no matter what you do when it's involving money, transfer of money, the settlement of funds, make sure there's something that we call a maker checker, or some type of dual control, so that one person's doing it and another person separate is reviewing it and checking it. And those two people cannot be in a supervisory relationship. There's got to be one person that does signing the checks, and I'm using, euphemism for signing the check, the other person's verifying it. Follow the processes and make sure you have a maker checker and don't deviate.
Yeah, excellent advice, because over and over we see this when we go back to the law firms who've had a compromise, or the clients who've had a compromise. They were socially engineered to let down their guard or to miss one step, and that one step sometimes of calling the person just to verify that it's truly that person who's asking for the change can save you a lot of money and a lot of time lost, even if you get some of the money back, a lot of time lost trying to, explain to everybody how it happened. I would say prevention is a lot less work than recapping what happened later. As Citi tries to protect its clients from cyber-enabled fraud events, what is security ops and cybersecurity ops role in that process like? And your team's fraud prevention team?
So the job is really, number one, providing that front layer of defense for you. But again, going back to what I said, the weakest link, again, I tell folks, if you expect your bank to do it alone, you're going to be a future victim. You have to look at, and what we try to push to our consumers is that it needs to be a partnership between the bank and the consumer. Because again, where the fraudsters are targeting, they're targeting you outside of the bank's ecosystem. So we try to build what I'll call a seamless, customer-friendly process to ensure that we safeguard your money, but we need you to do it with us. Again, I'll repeat this, that I think there's a lot of folks out there that feel that only less intelligent, non-educated people get hit with fraud or with scams. That is absolutely not the case. I can tell you, I receive every escalation that goes to our CEO, and I've had to call CEOs of multinational corporations. I've had to call very, very smart people, because very, very smart people are busy. And when things get going, they're trying to do 2 or 3 things at once, guess what? They click on something, they send something, and when it's sent or it's clicked on, it's likely too late. So really, what we try to do is create a partnership with all of you to ensure that we protect your funds and your PII. But can't do it without you. So you need to take it seriously and say, hey, look, we have a vulnerability. The vulnerabilities are people. So think about how we are going to educate our team and stay focused on the threat. If you don't, you're going to be a future victim.
Absolutely. And like you said, it hits everybody. It hits everybody. The most sophisticated people I've seen, even, some colleagues, etc., who sometimes, as much as we talk about fraud almost every day, catch themselves at the last minute, like, oh, I almost fell for something. Because they took that 1 second or 2 seconds to stop and say, this doesn't feel right, this doesn't like it. But then you get caught up in the moment, because fraudsters are so good. It's their profession. They are so good at trying to manipulate and engineer. I mean, I know I've heard one recently where they're actually calling your kids and getting them on the phone to record their voice, to then call you and act like they're the child and saying, I've had an incident, I've been arrested. And I had a family member actually receive it, and he said, it's dead on, he thought it was his son. But he caught himself by getting the facts together. But the initial, like, oh my God, my son had an accident. He's been arrested. He gets caught up in that moment. And just by taking the time to be diligent and putting all the facts together, he thought about it for a second. He's like, I never actually called my son on the cell phone to make sure it was him. It wasn't him. And it ended up not being him. And we've had clients fall for the same scam, and it's so insidious in nature. And I think that's the thing we all have to take away is the fraudsters are really, really good. And they constantly innovate every day.
Let's a few, one takeaway for all of you, and she hit on it, this sense of like an emergency is unfolding. take away nothing but today, never, never transfer or send money when there's an emergency. Think about it. Look, in a legitimate emergency, you will never be required to instantaneously wire money, right? Hospitals, police departments, judicial systems, they will always allow you to work. You never have to send money. No bank is ever going to call you up, and this happens a lot. No bank is ever going to call you up and say, hey, you are a victim of fraud, please transfer your money. Every day I get calls from customers who say, I thought it was Citi calling me. They told me to transfer my money. They told me to transfer it offshore. No bank is ever going to get you or ever going to ask you to move, send, or transfer money. Anytime you are called or contacted and asked to send or transfer money, and there's an urgency behind that, stop.
Yeah. And call somebody you know. Call them, contact your bank, call your relative who they're reporting has a problem, call somebody you know. If it's a title company, call the known number of the title company. If it's your client, call the known number of your client. Don't trust a phone call in or an email. So on that note, and talking about consumer fraud as well, what are some things that consumers can do as best practices to really protect themselves, and which also then translate over into businesses?
Yeah, I give these same tips multiple times a year. I'd say probably very few people follow through with them. Now, I'm a little bit of a geek. I follow them to an extreme, but I can tell you they will help you not be the slowest gazelle in the pack. If you don't follow them and you want to be the slowest gazelle in the pack, well, we all know what happens to the slowest gazelle in the pack in Africa. So first of all, like Brad said, and like I said, education is top of mind. You have to educate yourself. When you see something, when you see a suspicious email, Google it. Google and see, hey, is this a scam? I guarantee you're going to find, wow, that is a scam, right? So educate yourself, be a partner. Keep your devices, whether the devices are your computers or your mobile phones, keep them up to date. Those security patches get pushed out, Microsoft Tuesdays, a lot of times there are vulnerabilities that the fraudsters know about. If you don't keep your device, your mobile phone, up to date, you're just setting yourself up for an opportunity for the fraudsters to take advantage of that. Wi-Fi. Don't use public Wi-Fi for anything other than browsing, reading stories. If you want to conduct business, don't use it on a public Wi-Fi. You go to your local coffee shop, and that local coffee shop never had Wi-Fi, and suddenly they got this free Wi-Fi. It may be a scammer setting up a honeypot, which is not really the business, but waiting for you to log on so he can capture your information. Brad mentioned it, username and passwords. I'll also take it a step further. You should not reuse username and passwords ever. If you are out there and you've got your dog's name, your favorite football team, baseball team, Fido123, oh, you know what? I'll be really tricky. So for Target, I'll use Fido123. For Citi, I'll use Fido321. It's not going to work. As Brad indicated, you can do the search yourself if you don't believe us. Search cybersecurity and password.
How do you remember all of your
That's my next one. So don't reuse passwords, first and foremost. Every single password should be a unique password. If you Google it, you will find that any 6-character password can be cracked instantaneously. As Brad indicated, as you move that number up to about 12 to 16, it takes 1 trillion years, literally, for the best supercomputer to run through the various combinations. So, and then for your username, don't use your email address or your name. If I know sometimes websites require it, but if you have the ability, make your username unique, and longer is always better, and make your password unique. Now, to your point, what happens is people can't remember all the passwords, so they start cheating. They start using the same one over and over and over. Use a password manager. So you can do a Google search, top 10 password managers. I have something called Keeper. What it does, it stores in an encrypted way all of your username and passwords, allows for you to create strong, long username and password combinations. You don't have to worry about writing them down somewhere, putting them on your phone. Putting them in your notes on your phone, by the way, is horrible. It's very easy for me to get into the notes on your phone. Password manager is great. You can get a family plan so that your spouse or your significant other has it. But password managers will help you manage those. I probably have, to be honest with you, between online shopping and banking, I've probably got 40, 50 passwords. I don't have any of them memorized. And by the way, longer is better. You don't have to make it hashtag uppercase, A, lowercase b, 4, 3, this random. That doesn't matter. You can make your long username a unique, quirky sentence. Strolling through Central Park during a full moon. 1, 2, 3. That string of sentences is very hard to defeat because it's longer. Longer is always better with passwords. Being used a password manager. Lastly, I'll say 2 other things. Multi-factor authentication. Use multi-factor authentication. If your bank offers you a 2-factor or the ability to add multi-factor authentication, you got to do it. Because password and username just aren't good enough because the fraudsters get in there. And then the other 2 pieces, set up alerts, whether through your company or individually. You should be alerting every time you have a transaction. There's a capability, every bank offers it. When I use my credit card, I get a text alert. That lets you know exactly when somebody's using your card. You can set it up for ATM withdrawals, you can set it up for check deposits, you can set up alerts in your bank for a number of transactions. Set up those alerts and then look at your account activity periodically. Don't wait for your paper statement to come or your email statement to come, for God's sake. Because first of all, you're going to hit delete. You're not going to open it up, right? And that's what fraudsters rely on. Fraudsters rely on the fact that you're not tracking your Home Depot card, your American Express, your Citi card. And they're able to go for 30, 40, 50, 60 days before you find it. Every couple days, pull up online and just scroll through your transactions. Make sure you recognize them all. It takes literally about 40 seconds. I do it every morning. I have 3 banks. I have biometrics. I check really quickly. I go 1, 2, 3. Yep, I recognize those, and those. Done. So those are things you have to do. Now that may sound like a lot of work, but it's up to you on your personal side or your business side what your investments and your life savings are worth. But that's how good fraudsters are. You have to take control of your situation.
Yeah, you have to be diligent, and you have to, like you said, the alerts is a great one because so many times we see they don't find it fast because they start small. The fraudsters sometimes, they go for the big hit sometimes, but other times they start really small and you have a chance to catch it before it totally disrupts more and more of your day of trying to then manage away from it. So lastly on our panel is Mary Pope from our Treasury Management Banking team, and hopefully she could share some ways that all this work we're telling you to do, some ways that Citibank can help you do it and monitor against fraud and prevent fraud from happening against your account.
Thanks, Elizabeth. First, I just want to ask Mike, how do you feel about when you're asked if the iPhone can create the password for you? And it's very complicated and long, and then it saves it on the phone for you.
Yeah, I don't prefer that. It's better than writing it down and putting it in your back pocket. I prefer a cloud-based password manager because then you can access it and it's not stored on the device. So I prefer something that's not on the phone specific. Most of the good password managers are cloud-based. They've got end-to-end encryption, so I prefer that.
Okay. I'm just writing down all your tips, and I'm worried I might be the slowest gazelle, so I have some work to do tonight. But that being said, I head up our Treasury Management Advisory team, and what we do is really work with our clients to educate them on best practices and how to introduce efficiencies into their treasury management operations, so their payables and their receivables. And obviously a big part of that is fraud prevention and protection. So we meet with our clients on a regular basis and try to educate them on all the things we just heard about from Brad and Mike and how they can adopt these practices into their day-to-day operations so that they don't fall victim to fraud. So I'll just talk about a few of the things that we tell our clients to do. First and foremost, it's really important for firms to meet with their banking partners on a regular basis. So sit down, have a relationship review, understand what accounts you have open. You would be shocked at how often we meet with a client, we present them their account structure, and they will identify a handful of accounts that they believe they closed or that they'd simply forgotten about. And then, if you're working with multiple banking partners, this problem is just compounded. So on a regular basis, sit down, review all the accounts you have open, and then find out what services and products you have attached to each account. So you might realize that you have an account that's has incoming payments and outgoing payments, and you don't have any fraud protection services. So it's a really good exercise to go through good practices to separate your outgoing payment account from your receivables account so that if there is fraud on that payment account, your incoming payments aren't affected. We offer a number of fraud prevention protection tools that every firm should be using on every account they have. This includes post-note checks. So if it's a receivable account, there shouldn't be any checks written against that account. So we have a service where if a check is presented against that account, we will not allow it to be cashed because we know that this is an account that doesn't allow checks. ACH debit blocks. So if someone is trying to fraudulently debit funds out of your account, we will block that. You can put through allowable IDs for those vendors that should be debiting, a phone service, a vendor. And those will be the only ones allowed. Everything else will be blocked. So simple things like this, and they really are simple, that should be utilized, and it would really be surprising to all of you to learn that when we go through these exercises and review these accounts, so many firms are left without this protection. And so I just can't emphasize enough how important it is to meet with your banking partner on a regular basis, review these accounts. And then another part of that is reviewing the entitlements on the account. So who's allowed to transact out of this account? And to Mike's point, do you have dual authority? Is there a maker, checker setup? This really comes into play when you get that fraud attempt and it might appear to be someone senior in the company asking for an urgent payment to be sent, and you have to act quickly. If you don't have that maker checker, it's really easy to fall victim to that sort of fraud. So that's just a standard practice that we tell everyone to do. And then another thing is callbacks. So again, you might have a known customer email you with new payment instructions and telling you to send the payment to this new account. We always say call the known number on file, not the number in that email, because that will also be the fraudster's number. Call a known number to verify that that is the right account information. Oftentimes, more often than not, it's a fraud attempt. Very rarely will you receive an email with new payment instructions without a phone call from that vendor, because everyone's aware of the fraud landscape. And then really most importantly, which both Brad and Mike touched on, educate your teams. So, bring in your banking partner to help with the education process, but it has to be continuous and consistent because the fraud landscape is ever evolving, it's ever changing, and so we need to stay on top of it. It's not sufficient to just do it, once a year. Talk about this all the time. Protect yourself by educating your team. Really, those are the main ones. Another thing I'll touch on, when Elizabeth referenced that 87% of law firms have experienced fraud in the past 12 to 24 months, the vast majority of that fraud, or the most prevalent form of that fraud, I will say, is check fraud. So we educate our clients on moving away from those paper-based checks to electronic methods of payment. Not to say that those aren't susceptible, but they're less susceptible. Right now, we get calls from our clients almost on a daily basis that they sent a check, and the check never made it to the client, the vendor, and it was intercepted somewhere along the way. People are now getting keys to the blue mailboxes where checks are being dropped and taking all the mail out of those mailboxes, searching the checks, and then committing fraud with those. So there are many prongs that we talk about with our clients, but again, it's just really important to have that constant dialogue with your banking partner to understand what you all can be doing to help protect yourself and your firm.
Excellent advice. Any questions? Did we scare you all? I hope we did. Because I think everyone needs a little bit of fear. And like Mary said, and Mike and Brad, talked about the ways that we see fraud and the things you need to protect yourself. We're happy, and I'm sure if you don't bank with us, as your bank will be happy to too. Come in to that regular, conversation. And we do those annual relationship reviews. I'm on a lot of them with Mary's peers. And we just have a conversation of what are we seeing? How is fraud evolving? What do we think we need to think about? And, calling maker checker and callbacks to a known number, that's why we're seeing less of it hit the bank. Because that's things we've reinforced over and over and over again. And I can reinforce it with my team of 70 service officers who support the law firms industry. But it's harder then to make sure those law firm clients are reinforcing it with their employees. And so fraud has shifted that way. But we're here with you as a partner to help keep educating yourselves and your firms about what you need to think about for not just your firms, but also to protect yourself. So thank you for your time today. Really appreciate your attention, and hopefully you all went home with a little bit more sensitivity to fraud happens.